We begin this Monday taking a look at the top global players in arms sales. When it comes to selling weapons, the United States takes a very strong lead. Recent reports reveal that arms sales by the U.S. tripled in 2011 to a record high of over $66 billion. Now, no other country comes close. As you can see, the U.S. accounts for 79% of weapons sales. Russia comes in at a distant second at 6%. China lags even further at 3%. So who is America selling to? Turns out the top consumers are in the Persian Gulf. Saudi Arabia is the top recipient, over 33,000 arms agreements with the U.S. last year. India comes in second, United Arab Emirates third, and Israel comes in fourth. So what are the implications of all this? To discuss, retired Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer from the Center for Advanced Defense Studies joins us now. Anthony, welcome.
Thanks,
Just in the span of 1 year, U.S. arms sales tripled. That's a very significant jump. How does that happen?
Well, obviously, we're in a depressed world, and I hate to say that we have a huge military-industrial complex which requires all sorts of care and feeding, but that's part of the deal. Frankly, as we start to look at diminished military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, the brutal truth is this: we have an industry which is looking for new markets. They've not hidden this. And I think that's one of the things that you're seeing now is that these individuals, these groups, large corporations, which really are trying to grow about 7% per year, is looking for new markets. And I think they're finding new markets in a lot of the areas you just mentioned.
So you think this is all about business?
Oh, absolutely. And let's be totally honest here. Vladimir Putin called for Russia to also begin expanding its own arms market back in the 3rd of July. So this is not just the United States. This is a large global market that frankly, the Russians and Chinese both look at as well. So I think it's a great area for competition.
But they have they're very far behind at this point. The U.S. now kind of owning it with over 75% when it comes to the sale of weapons. So they have a long way to go before they can come even close to touching the U.S.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about the U.S. being 10 times larger in its exporting of weapons right now than the Russians. With that said, no one believes for a minute that expanding these markets are going to help make things more peaceful. Obviously, the greater influx of these weapons into any country, especially some of those in the Middle East, which are greatly unstable, I think will go very far to continue to see further destabilization of the Middle East as we go.
And want to talk about who exactly we're selling these weapons to.
Sure.
The top recipient was Saudi Arabia.
Right.
Anthony, what is the significance of that, with Saudi Arabia being a U.S. ally in the Persian Gulf?
The theory has been is if we maintain good relations with a lot of these countries, especially Saudi Arabia, as we saw during the Gulf War in '91, the idea is that they will maintain stability of their own oil fields and oil exports. The whole region, the Persian Gulf, is one of the largest producers of information relating to everything that's going on in the world right now. So, right now, everything that we're doing has to do with all the issues relating to what we need to do for the world on power and energy.
And also, beyond the United Arab Emirates, beyond Saudi Arabia, we have the United Arab Emirates and Oman. They're also top purchasers also in this region. What is the significance of this, and in terms of Iran, these countries being in close proximity to Iran?
I think that's one of the key issues. As you look at the geopolitical chess match going on right now, the Iranians are theoretically being isolated more and more. I don't believe that for a minute. I believe most of the actual sanctions have not worked whatsoever. And in many ways, as we noticed over the weekend with the non-aligned nations actually meeting there in Tehran, I think it's only added to the whole, as I mentioned before, situation where I think the more and more we add fuel, the more potential we have to start a fire that of all these weapons being there would help produce.
And $66 billion, that's how much was raked in by selling weapons. Anthony, what kind of weapons are we talking exactly?
We're talking about everything from F-16 fighters down to basic firearms. We're talking about M16s or the M4s, whatever the current flavor is, the full spectrum of things. And the theory is obviously by arming and helping arm our allies, these allies then would be able to do essentially a form of proxy warfare. During the Cold War, we had not, basically two areas: the Soviets and the United States. Everybody lined up behind them. A few non-aligned nations were outliers. Now it's not quite so black and white. And I think obviously the more that we can arm these folks, at least that's the theory. The thinking is with our Pentagon is that these folks would be available to actually support us in maintaining the lines of communication, lines of commerce relating to the Persian Gulf.
So we are seeing this strategy in a way to isolate Iran. In a way, I mean, is this kind of gearing up to go to war with the country?
Well, war is inevitable, I believe, at the current rate of high level of all the language being used with the Israelis, with the Iranians. Let's remember that a lot of wars have started over people having the idea that they can gain ground by using military force. I think right now, unless something dramatic changes, we may see war within the next 18 months, if not sooner. So I think that's why you see this large export of our weapons to what we believe out to be allied countries, such as UAE, such as Saudi Arabia, who would theoretically be there and willing to use their weapons that we sold them in supporting military operations to secure whatever the objectives are for that point in time.
And so now we are seeing these sanctions, these ramped up sanctions against Iran. Now we are seeing weapons being sold to neighboring allies. Anthony, how can we expect Iran to react to all of this?
Well, badly. I think that what you're seeing right now is that the government of Iran feels put upon. They do feel that they are being isolated. I think they've been very crafty in getting around sanctions. Frankly, the Russians are still supporting the Iranians in a number of aspects, to include the nuclear program, to include exporting weapons to the Iranians. So in many ways, you see it, at least in this power construct between the Iranians and the West, the Russians are still kind of siding with the Iranians. So I think what we can see over the next 6 months is a continuation of a lot of rhetoric from both sides. But the moment something bad happens, if one tanker gets a scratch on it, you could see a full-blown conflict within hours. And that conflict would see a lot of people lost very quickly. And frankly, it could lead to a larger conflict within the Middle East.
Certainly all sounds scary. I think the last thing most American people want right now is another war. Right. You mentioned before that this is all about business, but what is the foreign policy goal of the United States in all of this?
Good question. Right now, there is no global strategy for the United States, which has been something generals far and wide I've talked to are concerned about. The stated policy of isolating the Iranians is the primary focus at this point in time. But beyond that, we really don't have a strategy. We don't know what we're going to do if the Iranian Green Party tries to resurrect itself and try to throw off the current government. We don't know what's going to happen in Syria. So without a clear and cohesive strategy, other than trying to isolate the Iranians at this point and supporting the Israelis, there's really no clear path forward.
Meanwhile, as you describe this as a business, who is profiting?
Well, any company you can think of within the current construct of our production of systems: Boeing, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, a lot of arms manufacturers. This is, again, big business and something that they have been producing a lot of weapon systems for the U.S. military over the past 10 years. That market is diminishing. We're going to see even more diminishing through sequestration or whatever comes out of that over the next year. So they're looking for new markets. So they will continue to do what they can to find these new markets.
All right, Anthony, very interesting. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it. That was retired Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer from the Center for Advanced Defense Studies.
Thank you, Liz.